Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Jeff today. Jeff is a listener that reached out to me about an interesting experience that he had. Jeff is a listener that reached out to me about an interesting experience he had quite a few years ago. But it's a privilege to have you on the show, Jeff. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you very much. It's a little cold here in Florida right now.
Oh, dear. Yeah. I guess for future listeners, there's a weird weather pattern going on now where the south of the U.S. has experienced what we up here in the Midwest experience quite a bit as well. But, Jeff, I remember you reaching out through email, and I'm excited to hear what you experienced, but we were also talking before the show that it's a pretty big deal for you as well, that you're able to finally get this across in a forum in a kind of maybe even therapeutic way. So I appreciate you coming on the show, Jeff. And I'll have you go ahead and feel free to take us back to however long back we need to go and what we need to know about what happened to you that day.
Sure. I grew up in Minerva, Ohio, which is a small town in the eastern part of Ohio. It's about 3,200 people. And it's sort of famous because of anybody who follows the Bigfoot topic knows it is the Minerva Monster, which was a documentary produced in 2015, I think. My story takes place much before that incident. Mine's in 1972. And Minerva is like one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody. You have your group of friends. I mean, you sleep out during the summer. You sleep out in other people's backyards. And, it's just a typical Mayberry RFD kind of little town. And we had been talking to there's 5 of us, a group, the club, so to speak. And we had run into some older boys who had told us about an abandoned house about 2 miles outside of town, east of Minerva. And they said there's an old house out there, and it was part of probably an apple orchard at one time. And they said, it's pretty cool. Go out, be careful because it's kind of dilapidated. I mean, well, it is dilapidated. But you can, so boys being boys, go out and smoke cigarettes and drink a beer that we stole from our fathers or something like that. So we got on our bicycles and we rode out there, and they told us where it was. There was no road. There was just a old farmer's cutoff, up into the woods. And these woods are thick. These woods are very thick. And there was a mailbox there. No number on it or anything. Anyway, so we ride out there, and it was in August. We were on school break, and it was probably after lunch. I know that. So we ride out there, and we leave our bikes by the road because you can do that there. Nobody's going to bother your bike. And we walked into the woods, and it was about 600 yards back. And we kind of, going through the woods like you do, and we get to this house, and it was in not a clearing. There was trees in the yard and everywhere, but it wasn't as dense as the woods. And it was a 2-story house. It had no doors, it had no windows, or glass in the windows. It had a big front porch that had seen its better days. And there was a big hole in the roof. So we look, and by the way, I didn't put this in my letter to you, but on the way to the house, we had picked up a really foul odor, but I figured it was just a skunk. None of us had ever heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. We get to the house, and we're looking around, and we picked up some rocks because basically, in case there was a skunk, right? I'm the first one into the house, and the other boys are right behind me. It's not like they waited or anything. And I walked into the house, and there's a living room, and to the left was a bedroom, and there was a staircase that went upstairs, but you could see the hole, so we weren't going to go up there. And I walked to the doorway at the back of the living room, which led into a kitchen, an old-timey kitchen. It even had a hand pump at the sink. And there was no restroom in the house. I'm sure they had an outhouse out back. So I'm standing there and looking around, and everybody's kind of milling around. A couple of the guys walked into the bedroom and whatever. And I look out the back window of the house. There was no glass or anything. It was over the sink. And I saw, in my mind, I saw this big hairy thing just go past the window. There was no arms, no legs, no head. It was just hair, you know? And the first thing I thought was a bear. I know we had bears in that area, but they're extremely rare as a kid growing up. Maybe they're more common now, but then you just didn't see them or hear about them very much. But I just assumed it was a bear. It was a dark chocolate brown color. And I turn around and yell, "Bear," and go rip tearing through the living room, out the front door, and jump into the yard. And the other guys are coming after me. We're all, looking around like, "Where's this bear? Where's this bear?" And we're about maybe 30 feet from the house, standing out in the front. And I look over to the front porch. I'm not in the front. A kid named Randy was. So he was a little bit closer to the house than I was. And all of a sudden, this big old hairy head of what I first thought was a gorilla looks around the corner of the house to my left. And I was like, "What the heck?" I didn't say heck. "What the heck is that?" And everybody's like, "Wow," either yelling or, "What is that?" Right? And this thing just looks at us, and it's got a hand on the corner of the house and a hand on the roof of the porch. And this all really happened fast. But so Randy, out of fear, had a big rock. I mean, about the size of a baseball, only oval. And we were all pretty good at throwing rocks. I mean, that's what you do as a kid in Minerva, Ohio. You throw rocks at things, right? So our aim with a rock is pretty good. But Randy throws his rock and hits this thing right between the eyes. And it let out a scream. And now it's pissed, I think. I'm sure it is. And it goes to step on the front porch. Now, it was stooping to look under the ceiling of the front porch. So it's taller than the front porch. The front porch had to be at least 7 feet tall from the floorboards to the ceiling. And it was the floor, the floor was about 2 feet off the ground. So, and it was stooping to look underneath the ceiling. So you could figure that out. I figured between 8 and 9 feet tall. And we turned around to run because he had hit this thing and this thing let out a growl, and it steps onto the front porch. Well, the front porch was weak, and it crashed through the floor and buried itself up to about its neck. And so there must have been a root cellar or something underneath that front porch. And we're running. Now, I did look back once, and you could see this thing trying to get itself out of the porch. and it was ripping up wood and yelling, and it was. So at that point, we're running scared as dickens. But the wood is so thick, you can't really run in a straight line. You're dodging trees and getting slapped in the face with branches and stuff. And we get to our bikes, we grab our bikes, and we are pedaling for our life. What we thought was our life. We're just scared. I've never been so frightened in my life. And I've done some pretty frightening things in my life. And that was the most scared I've ever been. In fact, one of the kids peed himself. And we're just pedaling and pedaling and pedaling and yelling at each other. What was that? What was that? And we finally get about a mile from there. We're still about a mile out of town. And we kind of stop pedaling because it's obvious it's not coming after us. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Who are we going to tell? We're all yelling at each other, screaming at each other. And we decided to ride to the police station to report it, which was in hindsight, was a huge mistake. But so we ride into town, we go to the police station, and everybody knows everybody. In fact, the police chief used to babysit me when I was a kid. Okay. And so it's not like these are big town police, station or whatever. I mean, they had 2 jails. This is really like Mayberry. And we go running into the police station, and one of the officers, who will remain nameless, we're obviously very excited. We're out of breath, and they nominate me to tell the story. So I explained to him, we saw this big monster out by this house, and he knew the house. So it wasn't that big of a secret that the house was there. And he said, so-and-so's old place. And I was like, I guess. I don't know. I'd never heard of it. But anyways, so I tell him the story, and he starts laughing. And which is not the response we expected, actually, right? So we're all yelling at him, no, this is true, this is true. And he said, you guys saw a bear. And he said, it was just a bear. And we're like, no, it was not a bear. I'm telling you, it was not a bear. Bears don't have hands, right? And so the police chief heard all this because we're not being quiet about it. And he comes out and he listens to the story, and he says, it was a bear. There's no such thing as what you're talking about. It was a bear. And so after a while, we just kind of gave up. And he said he was going to call the county or game warden or something like that, county, whatever they are, to report a bear. And I said, well, I remember saying this to him because I had a smart mouth anyway. I said, well, you better tell him to take a big old gun because this thing was 8 feet tall. I said 8 feet tall. I don't remember. And I said, but it was at least 600 pounds, 500 pounds. And so we just kind of go out. We leave the police station. Well, he called all of our parents and told them that we were trying to file a false report. And some of the kids got in real trouble. I mean, they got really, parents, there was a different standard of parenting back then, right? And this is like 1972. Yeah, 1972. I was 14. And I went home and told my mom about it, and she just laughed. My mother was a hairdresser. And so she was the hairdresser for half the town. So we knew everybody. And but some of the kids got really, really in trouble because of trying to file a false report. My mother didn't care. And after that, there was a few fistfights during the rest of the summer, believe me. We tried to tell a couple people, and they all made fun of us. And of course, that led to, say that to my face. And that was it. And we talked about it. The 5 of us talked about it for a little bit. then, let's see, 14, 18, I went to college. In 1980, I went off to university. And I guess in 78, the Minerva monster incident took place, which involved the Stark County Sheriff and all that stuff. And one of the guys told me about it. He called me up and said, "Did you hear about what happened out, what was their name, Coyer?" Yeah, we knew them, that really well. Out at their house. And I said, "No." And they told me about it because they had gone around town. And I felt a little bit better about it. It was like, huh? Yeah, now I see. So, and then after I got out of college, I moved out of state. And I was living in Houston, Texas at the time. And I got a call. This is 2014 or 15. I think that's when the Minerva Monster came out, the documentary. And one of the guys said, "Do you think this is the same thing?" I said, "I have no idea. But I'll tell you this. After that documentary came out, I heard from a lot more people, not a lot more people, a number of people, that there were more and more people saying, yeah, we did see it, da 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 da." So apparently, these sightings go a long way back. And I mean, Minerva was founded in the early mid 1800s, like just before the Civil War. And come to find out that there were stories about these tall ape-like creatures were monsters. Everybody called them monsters back from the early 1800s around there. And everybody just used them as, scare the crap out of each other out camping. And nobody really put any store into it. But I didn't know that. I had never heard of it before. And so that's my story.
Jeff, that is a fascinating account. I mean, it's got that classic Americana Stranger Things, but this is a thing that you really, really experienced yourself. And just to hear that much the entire town, people that you're supposed to trust, were just making fun of you and laughing at you the whole time.
Oh yeah,
it must have been terrible. I can't imagine how that affected, a growing, young teenager, how that affected the rest of your life.
You just shut up about it. Yeah, you just after that summer, you just never talked about it again, unless it was one of the kids that I was with. And even that, I can't remember. I think it was Roger. He denied it. He was the one that got really in trouble. He was the one that got home, and his father just beat the crap out of him for turning in a false report.
Yeah.
And he denied it after that. That, it was a bear or he didn't see it or whatever. And we would just stood there and looked at him like, are you nuts? I mean, we couldn't believe that he would sit there and do that, but he did. And one of the kids, I went back to Minerva, I don't know, it was probably in the early mid-90s for a visit. My mom still lived there at that time. And I went back for a visit and went to one of the local bars that everybody went to and ran into three of the guys. They had stayed in Minerva and were still friends. And, I sat down and we were talking about catching up about what's going on in Minerva and who's doing who and all that other stuff. And I said, do you guys remember when we went out to that house? And one of the guys got up and left immediately. Didn't just said, I'm not sitting around for this BS. They got up and left.
Whoa.
And the other two sat there and we talked. And come to find out, Randy, who had thrown the rock, he came from a good family. I mean, they were one of the upper middle class families in that town. They had their own business and stuff. And he became a raging drunk and committed. And I asked the guys, I said, because of this, you think? They said, we don't know, Jeff. He said, when we were in high school together, you kind of went off and did your thing. And I said, yeah. And he said, and Randy that's when he started drinking. So maybe so. I don't know. I'll tell you this. I have not been in a woods since. I went to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington on vacation and took a hike with a group of people. And I was looking. I'm telling you, I was like, I looked like a ninja, man. I was just looking around. I was just getting ready. But I will not go into woods anymore. I really won't. I mean, you'd have to drag me. There'd have to be a good reason for me to walk in. And I used to do it as a kid all the time. We used to go mushrooming and, explore and make forts and all that stuff. But I wouldn't do it. No, 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 no. So that's how it has affected my life.
I'm sorry that happened to one of your friends.
Yeah.
That is absolutely heartbreaking. Man. You never know how being a part of an experience like this is going to affect a person's life. And unfortunately, in this story, this account, it affected the different boys involved in many different ways. I have a few questions for you about what you actually saw that day. And so you saw it peeking out from the corner of the house. Did you get any feeling for how long the arms were? You said you noticed that it had one hand one place and then one hand up on the roof, right?
On the ceiling, yeah. Like when it was standing there. All right. So what happened was it came around. It didn't peek around. It came around. And when it came around, it put its right arm up on grabbed the roof of the porch. Okay. And then the other hand, the left hand, came around and grabbed the corner of the building, like it was about ready to pull itself around. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how long the arms were in relationship to its body, but they were long. Well, it was so tall. I mean, so yeah, they were long. I mean, obviously, this is a big thing. This is a big creature.
I'm sure. Well, how long would you say the entire, from you seeing it out the window to you guys running off towards the bikes, how long did that whole part take?
Probably less than a minute.
Wow.
From the time I saw it in the window and yelled bear, after it registered that what I saw was actually going past the window. So a few seconds there, maybe, and it registered in my mind that this has got to be a bear because I didn't know what else could be that big to fill a window. And we ran out. So that was, 10, 20 seconds maybe at the most. And then we stood there looking back at the house and looking at the corners around because we weren't sure where it was going to go. I know it was back there, but I didn't know if it was going to come around the house or what's going on, or are we going to have to climb trees or whatever. And the guys are going, "What did you see? What did you see?" And I was like, "It had to be a bear." And then as we turned back to the house to look, as we're looking at the house looking to see where this thing was going to come out, then it came around the corner. And I followed your show, and you did a thumbnail, I think, on episode 636. Do you remember that?
I am going to actually go look real quick. Let me see here.
That was it.
Oh, really? Was it really close?
That was as close as I've seen on. It wasn't. You could tell after I thought about it. I didn't sit there and analyze it at the time, but it was not a gorilla-looking thing. It was more human-looking, but it wasn't human.
Mm.
Without that thumbnail, if you wanted to look at a human being and say what would be closest to that, It'd be an Australian Aboriginal.
Okay.
Okay, that is about as, so if you took an Australian Aboriginal and haired it up so it was long hair, that's what it would look like. 636 is about the best thumbnail I've seen.
That's very interesting. Yeah, no, I'm looking at it right now. That's good to know for sure. From
The
what you
skin
were,
was lighter, but
skin was lighter. Okay. Was it a certain
yeah.
color, the skin that you remember?
Um, it wasn't black. It wasn't. It was a dark brown. I mean, it was like a. I couldn't tell whether it was a. I don't know. It was dark brown.
Mm,
It was, almost, Indians, sometimes people from India have a dark brown skin.
sure.
It was like that, but very, very wrinkled, very craggy, very weathered.
Do you remember looking at the size of the head from what you saw that day? Do you remember if it was
Yeah, it
close
was
to
huge.
any like common
Just,
household objects or?
um, it wasn't as 636 is it. I mean, that's exactly what it looked like, other
Okay.
than the color. The fur was long. It was dense. You could see it thinned out in its chest, but you couldn't see the chest. I mean, it was just like a very hairy chest, but it was not as thick as like on the arms or the rest of it. It was definitely male. That's that I can tell you. Uh, so I don't know. The palms of the hands. We didn't see the feet actually because when it stepped up, it just went right in. I mean, I didn't even get two steps in, and it was fell through the floor.
Mm.
But the palms of the hands were lighter, and they weren't covered, of course. Teeth, yeah, it showed its teeth. The teeth were yellow,
Do you remember the shape of
no
any teeth
fangs.
at all? Okay, no fangs.
Yeah, no fangs. It wasn't like a gorilla. I'm telling you,
Mm.
I've seen gorillas, and it wasn't like that. There were human teeth. It was more of a human, but it definitely screams. It didn't do that howling scream that everybody, the Ohio howl or whatever they call that thing,
Sure.
that noise, that recording. I didn't hear that, but it was bad. There was no interpretation of how angry this thing was. When Randy hit this thing right in the head, it looked stunned. I mean, I don't think it really hurt it, but it wasn't expecting that. And he let that rock rip. And I thought, you dumbass, you're going to get us killed.
Right.
So
That's
I
wild.
really did.
Oh,
I did. I
yeah.
remember thinking, what the hell did you just do? You know? Oh, let's piss off the big old 8 foot tall monster. So anyway,
Was it bleeding at
no,
all when it was hit in the face?
no,
Okay.
no, no, but it knew it got hit by a rock, you know. So I don't know. I've never seen one since. I've never had anything like that happen, but anyway.
What are maybe some details that really stick out to you that, so if you have like a question inside, like maybe there was a chance that we were pranked that day by the older boys that told us about that.
Oh
Were there
no.
details that were like so vivid that like there's no chance this was faked?
Yeah, size.
Yeah.
Just the sheer size.
Okay.
There's nobody that lived in Minerva that was that big,
Mm.
even on the basketball team. And this thing was just the sheer size of it eliminates any possibility that this could have been a human pranking us. And if I'll tell you this, If that would have been a human, and Randy had hit that with a rocket and knocked him cold. This is a big. I mean, this wasn't a huge rock, but it was a good sized rock, and so it would have knocked him cold. That would have hurt somebody. There's no way that anybody. Yeah, no, just the size. And like I said, I haven't told any. I haven't really told anybody this since in the last 6 months.
Wow.
There's a few people I've told about, and I've had friends for 40 years that I've never talked about. I never told this.
Absolutely, because I mean, this goes back. Like, was it 50? It's about 52 years, 53 years, right?
Yeah, I'm 67.
Yeah.
Well, I will be 67 on Saturday. But
Wow.
yeah, I was 14, so 53 years? Something like that? Yeah. And like I said, I used to love go exploring and stuff. And I've got to believe, I think there are different subspecies of Bigfoot across the nation. I think they're tribal. I think they have culture. You read about instances out west and about how they interact with people out west versus how aggressive they can be in the eastern part of the country or other parts of the country. And people are like, well, I don't understand your experience when, I didn't have that. I think there are subspecies and I think they're tribes and I think they have a culture. And I think it depends on what you run into. I'm not a big proponent of some of these other cryptids, but I see where there's what is it called, Afropithecus, that they say has been gone extinct 60,000 years ago.
Sure. Right.
But I think there's an evolutionary path for these creatures. A scientific, that I do. I just think that when they finally do get the opportunity to study one or get one, or when somebody really puts together the money and the effort to find something, to find this, I think they're going to find that they're extremely, probably more closely related to us than a chimpanzee, which has like 96% of our DNA. I think they're going to find this to be somewhere in between there. And I think it does have a culture. And that's just based on me listening to other people. That's none of my experience. That's just me kind of following along with this. So I don't know. We'll see. Someone's going to find it.
I agree. I think I would say hopefully it's coming sooner than later, but there's definitely an intelligence that is shown from, people that I talk to. I've talked to, a lot of people over the years, but now I want to ask you, from what you were able to see that day, especially from your memories of what you saw in the face of it, would you categorize it more as something that was human-like or more ape-like or something completely different?
It was. Let me put it this way. When I was a kid, I hunted. Now, we didn't have any weapons with us on this particular bicycle trip, but I hunted as a kid, and I would not have shot it. Let me put it that way. It would have felt like shooting a human, an ugly one, a hairy one, but it would have felt like shooting a human. So to answer your question, I would say human other than the fur. And that's what kind of, for years, that's what kind of just, until you see it, you can't I guess you really can't explain it. But it looked more human, I guess. But it didn't. It looked like a big furry human is what it looked like. I guess, yeah, that makes sense.
You saw it move in different ways, and they're really weird ways that you saw it. Like you saw it rush past a window, move around a house and then kind of fall down into the wood of a porch or be stuck there. Was there anything weird about that you noticed about the way it was moving at any time?
No, I mean, it moved past that back window. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't running or anything like that. It was just like walking past it. It must have known we were there. Like I said, we smelled something going into the woods. So afterwards, when we all got together and talked about it, we think it was observing us. And I think it saw us come into the woods or go at some point, picked us up, that we're there. We weren't trying to be quiet. So, you're kids, right? You pick up a limb and you start whacking things and to get through the brush and the ferns and all that stuff. And so I think it was probably saw us when we could smell something. And I remember saying, "What is that?" And the only thing I could relate it to was a skunk. But it didn't, and again, you think back on it, it didn't really smell like all that much like a skunk. It's maybe a dead skunk. It smelled like, have you ever hunted? Have you ever smelled something dead?
Oh, yeah, like a skunk? Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. It was a sickening, but it wasn't real strong. It wasn't like, oh, turn around, go back. It wasn't real strong, but we could smell it. And that's why we picked up the rocks. Like I said, when we got to the front end of the yard, it was kind of a rocky yard, and there were some apple trees around there. And we picked up the rocks, and I think I picked it up first and said, one of the guys said, "What are you picking up a rock for?" I said, "Well, there's a skunk in that house." You throw the rock because it'll chase you if you don't. Right. So that's why we picked up the rocks, is because we thought there was a skunk in the area.
This area that you were in, how close was it to a body of water?
There was a golf course within a mile, and they had water features.
Okay.
And then there's creeks, creeks all over that place. So there might have been a creek nearby, but we didn't cross one going in. But again, there could have been, I don't know. I could tell you this, that woods, even though that place has been settled for a very long time, and there are lots of farming going on, the woods there are very dense. And where they do have tops of trees, they're close together. I could probably walk miles in trees if I tried to, I might have to cross a dirt road or two, but I could probably walk for miles in trees and not enter into a field if I knew where I was going. And people don't think Ohio is like that because, they think it's just farmland and stuff. In eastern Ohio, it is very dense, the woods. And there's a lot of deer. There's a lot of deer out there, and there are squirrels and rabbits, and so there's plenty of food. So I don't know.
This
is in Carroll County. By
okay,
the way.
Gotcha.
Minerva's a weird little town. Minerva sits on the intersection of three counties, literally. Stark County, which is where the Minerva monster took place. Then there's Carroll County, and then there's Columbiana County. And this is Carroll County, which is in the southeastern quadrant. And that's a very rural county. It's very small. Carrollton is the capital, was the county seat, and it's very small. So
it's good to know that. It's good to know that information about that location as well. Thinking back to, what you heard over the years when growing up, going to school there, that area where the house was, were there stories that were told about that area? Any like town legends or like, don't go out to this area because this kind of thing happens?
No, it was opposite. It was like this cool place to go to. That was very popular. It was before the age of tagging, so there was nobody was tagging or anything. But it was just a rundown old house that the kids would go out to explore. People ghost stories and stuff, but nobody believed that. Although I've had my experiences on those too. So
having connections to that town, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but do you remember any other people telling stories about their encounters with Bigfoot or whatever it is you saw that day as you got older through that town?
not really. I mean, one of the things I forgot about that I've now remembered since I put this story down is there was a couple times, like I said, we would sleep out, right? I don't know if you grew up in a small town,
Oh
but
yeah, yeah.
what you do, you get with your friends, you go to their house, you sleep out in the backyard with a sleeping blanket and some snacks your moms would bring out to you and stuff. And then your parents go to bed and run around town past curfew. But anyways, there were a couple times that I remember that Ohio yell, but we always just put it up to coyotes or dogs or whatever. But after I after I heard the recording of the Ohio yell, I thought that had to be it. And it was only a couple times. It wasn't like often or whatever, but there was only a couple times. Then there was another time when I was in high school. I was probably junior or senior at this point. That there was a group of girls. They lived out in the country in a trailer with their family, and they said that something was looking in their window, and scared the crap out of them. Called the police or called the sheriff or whatever, and people went out hunting for them, but they never said it was a Bigfoot. They just said, "Guy, somebody was looking in their window." Well, again, I didn't put two and two together here because I should have maybe. But do you know mobile homes? You can't just go up to a window in a mobile home and look in. They're tall. They're not like a regular house. And so maybe so, but that's the only thing I've ever heard.
That's interesting, and a good call out about the height of windows on mobile homes for sure. One last question that I want to ask you.
Shoot.
Sometimes when a person has had an interaction or encounter like this, they will
Uh-huh.
have other things happen in their lives, just maybe weird things, stuff that might be
Oh yeah.
considered paranormal. Did you have to deal with other things that potentially could have been related to what happened to you as
Okay.
a teen?
Yes. But you're gonna think I'm nuts, but I'm not nuts.
You're not
I mean,
nuts.
these
No.
I can tell you three things that actually I would put my hand on a Bible and test to. Okay. During one of my marriages, there have been a few. One came with a stepdaughter. I had bought a 1902 bungalow in Houston, Texas that I was redoing. And it was a two-bedroom and one bath. So my wife and my stepdaughter moved in, and we're laying in bed one night. And my stepdaughter at that time was about 7. And she loved playing in the bathtub. And I had one of those old clawfoot bathtubs. I mean, it was like a lake, right? And so we're laying there trying to fall asleep, and we hear the shower go on. And and my wife rolled over and looked at me and said, "You go do it. Go tell Madison to go back to bed." And I said, oh, "All right." So I get out of bed and I go into this little hallway where the bathrooms and the bedrooms all emptied onto. And the door to the bathroom was open and there was no light on. And as soon as I got out of bed, the shower stopped. And I went in there, that shower, there was nothing there. I mean, there was no water, no nothing. And I looked at Madison's room and she was asleep. And I got back into bed and my wife said, "What was that?" And I said, "We'll talk about it in the morning." But I was creeped out, right? And I told her in the morning, she said, "Well, let's not mention this."
Mm.
And we're sitting there having breakfast as my daughter's getting ready to go to school. And she said, "Josh, why were you guys taking a shower so late?" So she heard it, right? And my wife and I just looked at each other and said, I don't remember what we exactly said. So that's one. All right. The second one I will attest to and put my hand on the Bible is we had some friends that we went out to the house. They lived out in the country. And this guy had prosthetic legs. And so we're out in the backyard around a big fire pit. And behind their garage, they had a dog run. And they had a black lab in the dog run. The dog run was maybe 20 yards from us. So it's time to go home. We weren't doing anything else. But we were just having BS and having fun. And I stand up, and my wife stands up next to me to leave. And they stand up. They're across from us on the fire pit. And I look down to the right, and there's a golden retriever. And I said, this guy's name, I said, I didn't see the golden retriever in the dog run. And he goes, "What golden retriever? We don't have a golden retriever." And I said, "You have one sitting right behind you." And my wife said, "I saw it." And I said, "We had a golden retriever. It ran away. We just assumed it died." Swear to God, man. There was a golden retriever standing there. And this guy's got so angry with me, he never talked to us again. Because I insisted that there was a gold retriever sitting behind these people. Swear to God. So the 1902 house. So this is in an area called the Heights in Houston, which was the original suburbs of the Heights. So it's maybe a mile or two from downtown at that time. And this house, particular house that I had, was the original model home for a guy that developed about 2 or 3 blocks of that area. And all the houses were bungalows, small homes. And I walked out of my kitchen into the living room or the dining room. I turned it into a TV room and looked to my right. And there was this guy sitting in one of my chairs. And he had a wife beater t-shirt on, bald head, slumped into the chair, looking down at the floor. I saw that. I mean, I was dead sober. And my wife was home, and I said, "You're not going to believe what I just saw." And I went across the street the next day to ask a neighbor who had lived in that place, in that house, in that neighborhood her entire life. And I asked her, I said, "Have you ever heard that my house is haunted?" And she kind of looked at me and she said, "Why? What did you see?" And I explained to her, and she said, "Well, that sounds like Mr. Scarafano or whoever he was that, built the house." And I said, "Really?" And she was like, "Yeah." So I don't know. I'm just saying.
The interesting thing about those stories is in that in two of them, you had another person by yourself that experienced the strange event. which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, my ex definitely on two of them, and then she didn't see the apparition in the living room. We would be sitting there watching television, all of us on a sofa, and she would say, "Do you smell that?" And I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "It smells like stinky socks and cigars." And I'm like, "What?" And you think about it, yeah, it sure did. It sure did. And it just, which I guess the guy smoked cigars. I don't know. Could have been. I don't know. I'm just, like I said,
Mm.
that's something that, until you see it. I was very skeptical about all that. But then after that,
Personally, I've been working over a theory for a year or so now, where I think that if you come into contact with one of, a Bigfoot, or you're in the same area, it kind of opens you up to other stuff. And I think that, it sound kind of crazy saying it, but I think that there's something there, and we just don't understand how it works science-wise.
Well, I've had two times in my life where I've heard somebody call my name.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time happened when I was in my early 20s. My first wife, I was at home and I heard somebody say, "Jeff." I ignored it. "Jeff." I ignored it. And finally I thought, who does that sound like? And I said, "It sounds like my wife." So I called her at work, and it was pouring down rain. And there was rain coming in the back of her building, her office. And she was there by herself. She was the secretary. She's an agent there. And she said, "Come right away. I need your help," on the phone. So I went. The next time that happened was 30 years later. And I was in Houston, and I heard, "Jeff." Nothing. "Jeff." Nothing. And I thought, who does that sound like? And it sounded like my mother. But she lived in Florida. So I called her. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "The ambulance is on their way. I think I'm having a heart attack." And I said, "Well, don't be on the phone. Get off the phone and just lay down and wait for him. I can hear the ambulance coming." And I said, "I'll call one of the neighbors later and find out how you are." And so that was the second time. But those two things have happened to me. That's the only things that psychic things, type things, I guess you could call them that. But those two are true. Absolutely true.
That's some fascinating things. I think we definitely need to be aware. If people were more aware of what's going on around them through their senses, they would probably be surprised of what might be happening. But Jeff, it has been just an extremely interesting conversation. Thank you for sharing what you went through more than 50 years ago. And I'm glad you were able to get your account out there finally to get that off your chest, as people like to say. But if anything else, does happen down the road, always feel free to reach out. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
All right, Jeremiah. You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.